Alright, well, good morning. It's another beautiful day here at Camp Crazy. As you can see, it's sun is shining and it's already quite warm, and it is only 10 o'clock in the morning. I'm doing my best to sit in the shade here. There's not a lot of shade right now, but I'm finding it. I'm finding it. Wherever it is, I'm finding it. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit about roles and expectations in society, and how the role that society tries to pigeonhole a person into and the expectations that follow can really affect a person. In so many ways they can affect a person, and they can not only affect a person, they can affect anything or anyone that person is responsible for. I'm experiencing some of that right now. I'm going to have to go way back here to the olden days, basically to the olden days, and give you guys, I'm actually old enough now that I could actually talk about the olden days, But we're going to go back now to the olden days. We're going to go take a trip back with me, to another era, to a different era. Yeah. Anyway, an era I remember, an era I lived through. And there were things that happened in that era that do shed some light on what has happened since then and what is still happening. Okay, well, basically, I'll start off by talking about school, because it was really school where things started for me in a big way. It seems like when we go to school, that's when we get our first taste of society in a big way, and it's where we get our first taste of our assigned roles. The pretty girl is expected to be a certain way. The homely girl is expected to be a certain way. The athletic boy is expected to be a certain way. The handsome boy is expected to be a certain way. And so on. People attribute characteristics. Anyway, we were in kindergarten. That was the first. Kindergarten was nice. We had a very wonderful teacher. Her name was Mrs. Fortner. And she was like everybody's favorite old aunt, We really loved her. We thought the world of her. Anyway, Mrs. Fortner passed away quite a few years ago now, but she was very much loved. By all of us. And we were all very fortunate to have known her and to have been students of hers. I don't want to get emotional here. I'm trying my best not to be emotional. But it's not easy. It's not easy, when I talk about these, when I talk about the past. The thing for me is, I remember the past vividly. Like, I remember where I was when certain things happened. I remember what I was thinking. I remember what I was seeing and hearing. I remember what places looked like. I remember what people looked like. I remember what things sounded like. I remember what things smelled like, I have very vivid memory for the past. Now I'm in a state where I forget, I have an appointment tomorrow or whatever, and I forget it. But you asked me about something that happened in 1970, and I can tell you about that. You know, I can tell you what kind of car the guy was driving, and what the color of his shirt, and whether he was wearing a hat or not, and you know, and every single word that was said in the conversation, and all the rest of it. You know, I can tell you what the label on a tin of motor oil that was on a shelf in the background in a room or whatever looked like and stuff. Like I'm just that. I have it's that vivid. I have like a photographic memory for these things. And when I was a kid, I actually remember consciously deciding to remember certain things. I remember saying to myself, I am going to remember this. This is something I want to remember, and I would. But anyway, getting back to school, we had Mrs. Fortner. She was wonderful. In grade 1, though, see, in kindergarten, the way it worked is when we got off the buses, we went directly into the school. We had a room that we went into with benches and hooks for our coats and all that business. And we go in there first, and then we went from that room across the hall into the kindergarten classroom, which was Mrs. Fortner's classroom. Now, the classroom next to that was Mrs. Merkley's classroom, and she was the grade 1 teacher. Now, I found out in the years since that Mrs. Merkley had some pretty heartbreaking experiences, and I don't want anything I say here to be a show of disrespect for Mrs. Merkley. I don't think that would be appropriate, and I don't want to be disrespectful to anybody I'm speaking about. There's a couple of teachers I'm going to talk about here, though, who weren't particularly kind, and I have some understanding of why now as an adult, because I know a little bit of their situations at the time. But still, it was tough, It was pretty tough on all of us, really. And some of us it was really tough on. But anyway, Mrs. Fortner was wonderful. In grade 1, though, the process was different in the morning. We were to get off the buses, and we were to go up the side of the building there. There was a sidewalk that ran along the left-hand side of the building between the school and the convent, which was set back because this was a separate school. Or for you people who don't know what a separate school was or is, that was what we called the Catholic schools. They were separate schools because they were separate from the public school system. And so I went to a separate school because I was a Roman Catholic. And we go up the sidewalk anyway, and around and up another up the driveway, which actually was the driveway for the convent, and into a field out back. It was literally called the back field. That was our playground. There were trees and rocks and grass, and that's where we played. Anyway, and when you were in grade 1 and beyond grade 1, you were to go directly to the back field until the bell rang, and then you were to line up outside the school. There had a line painted on the pavement, and each class number was there, 1 through 8, and you'd line up there behind your number, and single file lines, boys on one side, boys on the right, girls on the left, and you'd be marched into the school by your teacher. See, now when we started grade 1, we weren't told anything. You kind of learn just by doing. So there was a bunch of us wandering around inside the school, and we'd run into each other the first day of grade 1, and we'd be saying, do you know where we're supposed to be? No, do you know where? We didn't know what we were supposed to be doing. Well, I got the idea, if you don't know what you're supposed to be doing, why not ask somebody who does know what you're supposed to be doing? A teacher will know what we're supposed to be doing. So I wandered into the grade 2 classroom, which was Mrs. Schaefer's classroom. And I asked her where I was supposed to be. I told her I don't know where I'm supposed to be. And she was angry. And she took me by the collar, just got right by the collar there, and she frog marched me out of the school. Frog marched me through the basement and out the side entrance there. She pointed to the back field, and she called me a dummy. And she said, "There, dummy. That's where you're supposed to be. Not inside the building. There." And then, so anyway, I went back there. When we got brought in then by our teachers, of course, they did the roll call. And as your name was read, you were supposed to say present. Present, ma'am. When my name was read, I said present, ma'am, like we had been instructed to. Mrs. Merkley, she looked at me and she said, "Oh, yes, you're the one who doesn't know where he belongs." So I kind of knew I was in trouble then. Kind of understood on some level that I was kind of marked as somebody who was a troublemaker or an agitator or an idiot or something. I kind of got that idea. Anyway, how she introduced herself to us is she wrote her name on the blackboard and she slammed the strap down on the desk. She introduced us to both, to herself and to her strap. And she let us know that we were no longer in kindergarten. This is the real world. And no nonsense would be tolerated in her classroom. And that's how it was anyway. Well, then, but that incident with Mrs. Schaefer, the grade 2 teacher, kind of set the tone for my grade 1 experience, because obviously Mrs. Schaefer had warned Mrs. Merkley about me. Just that one misstep, not knowing where I was supposed to be because we weren't told. And I wasn't the only one. There was a bunch of us wandering around aimlessly in the building trying to figure out what was going on. But I'm the guy who got caught because I had the bright idea to actually ask somebody, which seems like a perfectly sensible thing to do, but apparently it wasn't the right thing, and so I had to suffer for that. I had to pay for it. Of course, I get into grade 2, and Mrs. Schaefer, she already doesn't like me. She already doesn't like me. And so, she doesn't refer to me by my name. To her, I'm the little dummy. I'm not Tommy, like other people would call me at that time. I'm the little dummy. And she took my desk and she put it at the back of the room. She said I was not fit to sit with the other students because I was lesser than they were. You see, I was the little dummy. And she would take every opportunity to remind me that I'm a dummy, basically. I remember it upset me, it hurt me. I couldn't really do anything about it. It just was what it was. But I remember one time I decided I was going to prove her wrong. And she gave us our assignments for the morning, our work. I got all my work done. I made a point of getting it done quickly and early. And then I raised my hand and I asked her if I could come and see her at her desk, and she told me to come ahead up. And so I brought my work with me. And I put my work down in front of her and I said, "Mrs. Schaefer, I have completed my work." And she knew what I was doing. She knew it. And she says, "Yeah, I'll bet it's full of errors." She said, "I'll bet it's just riddled with errors. Let's have a look." And she went down through, and with each check mark she had to put beside what I had done, because there was no errors in it at all. I'd done it perfectly. With each check mark, I could see her face. She was getting more angry. She was getting more and more angry, and I was thinking, this is backfiring on me in a big way. I should not have done this, Anyway, she went through the whole thing, couldn't find any mistakes. That really was not a good thing. It set her off. And so she handed me a huge stack of papers You know, it seemed like about a foot high of papers, you know. I'm sure it wasn't that much, but it was a pretty friggin' thick stack of papers. She handed that to me, and she said, you think you're smart. All right, Mr. Smart Guy. If you're so smart, you should have no trouble completing all this before lunch. Get to it. So that was my wake-up call anyway, to realize that when somebody has an agenda to see you a certain way, they will see you that way. It doesn't matter what you do. You know, they will see you the way they want to see you, and you don't have any say over it because you don't control what they think, you know. So anyway, I learned that lesson that day. She wanted to see me as the little dummy, and damn it all anyway, I was going to be the little dummy. That was my role. That was my assigned role. And how dare I attempt to step out of my assigned role, you know? Anyway, so that was it. A thing had happened in grade 1 where I had refused to hit another kid while he was being held back. And that kind of had me on the outs with a lot of the other guys. A lot of the other boys weren't happy with me because I had went against what was normal, that this is what you would do. I went against it. It was a game that they called free punches, which I didn't like and didn't agree with. I had no problem with a fight. If two boys got into a dispute and they had to fight to settle it, I understood that. I had no issue with that. I'd fight and I'd win or I'd lose, but, you know, it was what it was. And I understood that sometimes males, boys and men both, sometimes have to fight. I saw my dad in a few fights when I was growing up. I watched him one time completely demolish a couple of guys who were a good 10 years younger than him in a fight in the Brewer's retail store parking lot. You know, over them opening their car door into the side of my dad's car. You know, and then when he warned them not to do it again, they laughed at him and they opened it even harder. The guy opened his door even harder into my dad's car. And that's when my dad got out of the car, and it was on anyway. He beat the hell out of both of them. My dad was a tough man, you know, and he could fight. He was handy with his fist. And he wasn't a very big man. He wasn't really any bigger than I am. But he was friggin' strong, and he knew how to fight. He knew the moves, you know. And those two guys underestimated him in a big way, and they paid a pretty heavy price for it. But anyway, and I remember seeing my dad in fights. I remember seeing neighbor men in fights. I remember seeing fights on the street and stuff. You know, it wasn't uncommon. And I understood that as a male, there's times you have to fight. So, okay, that's how it is. But this free punches game, what they do is they'd pinion a boy. Two bigger boys who got on each side of them and restrain him. And then they'd line up to punch him in the gut. And anyway, one day I got tackled that way. I was the one that they were going to punch. I probably told this story before, but I'll tell it again just briefly so that you know what it is, so I'm not confusing you, talking about an incident without actually telling you the details. Now, they had rules. You couldn't hit below the belt, and you couldn't hit in the face. Had to hit the guy in the gut. I never participated in that willingly, but this one day I was the victim. I was the one that they got a hold of. Now, the rule was if you went outside of the rules, if you hit the guy in the face or in the groin or whatever, well, then he got let go. You ended up getting grabbed up. Now you became the victim, and he got the first crack at you. So he got to punch you in the gut. I didn't want any part of any of it, you know. To me, punching somebody while they're being held back was a cowardly thing. I still think that, you know. I see videos sometimes now, because of course everybody's got cell phones, and you see a video of a police officer beating somebody when they're handcuffed with their hands behind their back. I think that's just about the most reprehensible thing. You know, I don't care what kind of an asshole that guy is. Maybe he deserves to be handcuffed. Maybe he deserves to go to jail. But you know, and maybe he is running his mouth and being an asshat. But at the very least, look, if you're a police officer and you're going to beat another man, at the very least, take his handcuffs off so he can defend himself, and don't hide behind your badge. Take your hat or your badge off or whatever and fight him man to man. Don't turn around and charge the guy with assaulting an officer if he hits you back, you know. But, you know, hiding behind a badge and beating somebody when they're handcuffed, to me, even if that person is a piece of shit, it's still a dirty, cowardly thing to do, and it's a dishonorable thing to do. If you're a police officer, you should do better. You shouldn't be of the same type as the people you're locking up. You know, that's not right. And I've always felt that way. So the idea of hitting a guy when he's got his hands behind his back and can't hit you back, or when he's being held, restrained, or whatever, I can't do it. And I couldn't do it back then either. And so I refused. I said, let him go and I'll fight him. He given me reason to fight him because he punched me in the face and gave me a bloody nose. And just the fact that he even lined up to hit me was reason enough to fight him as far as I was concerned. I hadn't done anything to him. He had no business coming and getting in line so he could hit me in the stomach and then hitting me in the face on top of it. You know, so I had every reason to fight him, but I wasn't going to hit him while he was restrained. And again, like my dad taught me some things about fighting and so on, and about, you know, certain things you just don't do. And he would have regarded that as a cowardly thing if I had hit that guy while he was restrained. Anyway, the bottom line is, you know, my dad had his issues, but in many ways he was a good guy. But yeah, he had his issues too. He certainly wasn't perfect. But then who amongst us is, you know? He did his best, and he did teach me that anyway, that you don't do dirty things like that. You don't hit a guy when his hands are behind his back or when he's restrained or whatever. You don't do that. Anyway, now later on in life, I did do things in fights that I know would have disappointed my dad. If he had been alive to see some of the shit I did in fights, he would have been disappointed in me. I'm kind of disappointed in me for some of the stuff I did in fights. But I wasn't healthy, and I was dealing with guys who were a lot bigger and stronger than I was. And I wasn't initiating these fights. These people were coming to me looking to bring violence. And so I feel like I did what I had to do, but there's still a part of me that feels shame for having done it. Anyway, my refusal to hit that guy put me on the outs. They let him go, by the way, and they grabbed me up again, and they give him the first crack at me, and I got a good punch in the gut from him while I was being restrained. So he didn't show me the same courtesy I was showing him. But there again, that's how things are in the world. You know, just because you show somebody else a little respect, even though they haven't earned it, don't think they're going to show you the same respect. You know, they might, but then again, they might not, and you have no say over what another person does, ultimately, you know. Anyway, so with all that, I had kind of a bad start in school. Then they decided that I was probably not right in the head because I wasn't fitting in and because I was getting into trouble and all that. I wasn't getting into trouble because I was a bad kid, though. I was getting into trouble just because of stupid stuff, you know, like I say, not knowing where I belonged and having the nerve to ask where I belonged. It got me in trouble. It got set the pace, set the tone, or whatever. Anyway, so I went through all that, and when I was about 7 years old, 7 or 8, I was tested. I was actually tested to see where I was at in terms of my intelligence or whatever, I guess. And I was tested twice. One of those times they said I was borderline mentally retarded. The other time they said I was mildly retarded. Basically, both times what they said is that I was a trainable idiot. That's what it boiled down to. I wasn't so far gone that I couldn't be trained to sweep a floor or something like that, you know, to pick up that bag of garbage and throw it into the back of the truck or whatever. I was smart enough I could probably do that. I could never hope to actually drive the truck, though. I wasn't smart enough to do that. But I could at least probably throw a bag of garbage into a truck or push a broom or, I don't know, sell pencils on the street corner or whatever, I was at least smart enough to do that. With training, with proper training, I could aspire to at least that level, Anyway, not that there's anything wrong with throwing garbage into the back of a truck or pushing a broom or selling pencils on the street corner. There's nothing wrong with any of that. But it's just that they tried to limit me to that, to say he could do this, but he couldn't do any better. Most people who are out there pushing a broom are smart enough to do something else if they choose to or if the opportunity arises. A lot of them are pushing a broom because that's what's available to them in the moment. And it beats starvation, beats not being able to pay your bills. And so, anyway, so I'm not knocking people who push brooms or who throw garbage into the backs of trucks or whatever. I think those services are very much needed, and those people do a good task. And doesn't mean you're stupid because you do those jobs, but still, that was the perception of the people I was dealing with. This guy's so stupid, that's all he'll ever be able to do. So again, you see, the role was being established now. My role in society was being established. I was the village idiot. That was my job. If it was an episode of the Andy Griffith Show, I guess I'd be Ernest T. Bass. That's the role that was assigned to me. Anyway, if you ever watched the Andy Griffith Show, you'll know about Ernest T. Bass. And if you haven't seen it, just look up Andy Griffith, Ernest T. Bass on. There's video of Ernest T. Bass anyway. That was supposed to be my role. I didn't like it. I didn't want to be Ernest T. Bass. I really didn't. And I just wasn't accepting of it, But I had very little say over it too, and it was expected that this is, we've assigned you your role. Basically, here you go. This is your lot in life. Well, of course, then I was taken and used as a guinea pig for drug experiments in Toronto when I was 8, given LSD twice. They actually made films. There's some old grainy black and white films somewhere out there of me as an 8-year-old boy on LSD. I actually saw them. A nurse played them for me, took me into a room with a screen and a film projector, told me I was a movie star, let me see the films. I remember them giving me the stuff, great big glass full of water, and they told me I had to drink the whole thing, and it tasted bitter, and I didn't want to drink it, and I was told you have to. Get the whole thing into you have to. And it was LSD. That's what it was. Twice I was subjected to that. Given massive doses of haloperidol, or Haldol is another name for it. Really big doses. Ended up having seizures on the stuff. Ended up crippled. Ended up, it just, well, the stuff that happened was bad, that's all. Went through all that. Came out of there weak as a kitten with all kinds of problems. Went in there a healthy 8-year-old boy and came out just an old broken down man, really, Anyway, went through all that, was sexually molested in there by an orderly. That happened too. A lot of really terrifying things happened anyway in that place, and that was 56 days I was in there, and I'm still recovering from it. 56 days in 1976, and now we're in, 2025. From 8 years old to nearly 57 years old, and I'm still recovering. I've never really completely gotten over that. My health has been affected by it always. My strength and my health and everything else. Anyway, again, they could do that to me because I was the village idiot. That's basically what it was, you see. And over the years, I run into this over and over again. When I grew up and I was driving cars and whatnot, I was getting continuously bothered by the police. Not because I was driving recklessly. You've seen my videos when I drive. I'm not driving, not speeding. I'm not running stop signs or driving recklessly or anything. Now there are laws here against even making a video while you're driving. But even at that, I do that on the back roads where I'm not liable to run into anybody and I'm traveling slow. And, so I'm still taking care and doing it. But the bottom line is this. I was getting pulled out of cars by the police and beat up. I was having charges trumped up against me regularly and everything else. Well, see, the police tend to be kind of predatory. It's in their nature because they hunt people for a living. When I was young, I remember there was a publication. It was a professional publication for police officers. It was called Manhunter. And that sums it up perfectly. These people, they hunt men. And the men they're supposed to be hunting, at least, are predatory men. So, it takes a bigger predator to catch a predator. So the police, they tend to be, by nature, they tend to be predatory. And I suppose they have to be. But what that means is if they see you as weak, you're liable to become a target. And that's what happened to me. And again, I was not willing to accept my role. And so I fought them tooth and nail. And then, I dispute charges. I get convicted all the time because it was the cop's word against mine, and the cop will be believed. But I'd still go and fight the charge as a matter of principle. And so on like that. Anyway, it ended up, I got to be known as a troublemaker by them, really. And I was also being targeted by guys on the street because they could see that I was struggling. I was weak and I was struggling physically because of what had happened to me when I was a kid. And so I was being jumped on the street and everything. I was getting my ass kicked up regularly. I remember back around 1986, I was 18 years old. I was walking to work. I worked 4 to midnight at Central Wire factory in Perth. They made wire. The name kind of gives it away, I guess, though, eh? But anyway, I'm walking from high school, to Central Wire. Had to walk across the town of Perth to get from where I went to high school at St. John's to Central Wire. I'm on the main street, Gore Street, in Perth, Gore Street. Gore, it's named after an old army man from way back. Anyway, of course, the cars are all parked along there. This is 1986 too, eh? So, cars were different back then, a long time ago now. I was a young 18-year-old walking along there. Anyway, had a pair of side cutters in the back pocket of my jeans because we use side cutters at work and we always had to have a pair of side cutters on us. And side cutters are like a pair of pliers, but instead of having a flat end to them, they have like a sharp pointed end and with cutting. They're like a cutting. They're a cutting tool basically. They're to cut wire. They're called side cutters. They're to cut wire. Anyway, that thing did cut my side. It gouged into my hip pretty good, tore my pants and gouged into my hip. Took a big chunk of meat out of my right hip. And how that happened was, I met a couple of guys coming the other way, and one of them purposely come up against me real hard and took me off my feet, and I went across the hood of a brand new Pontiac Parisienne. And anybody who's ever seen a Pontiac Parisienne knows this was the old-fashioned, full-size, rear-drive, body-on-frame car, you know. And they were still making them back then. Anyway, you know, those cars had hideaway wipers, so there was a gap between the end of the hood and the windshield. The wipers went down in there. Well, windshield wipers. Well, what I did is I grabbed on to the hood where that gap, and that's what kept me from going straight out into traffic. Straight out. I would have got hit by a car had I not done that. Anyway, that stopped me. My glasses flew off and went into traffic and got run over. And they were wrecked. And the side cutters, when I come up against the fender of the car and went up over the fender onto the hood, the side cutters, of course, dug in and they tore my jeans and they cut a big gouge out of my hip. And so I come down off that fender and I yelled at these two guys. I said, effing asshole. Well, they turned around and the one guy says, what'd you just say to me? And I said, you're an effing asshole. And his eyes narrowed. He said, you apologize to me or I'll beat the shit out of you. You apologize to me right now for saying that. And I knew I wasn't going to win a fight with these two guys. Plus, I was all hobbled up and injured and everything. There was no way I was going to win a fight, and I didn't want to take any more abuse. And so I apologized to him. And that moment, I'll tell you, I lost something there. You know, it took away something from me. Having to apologize to this asshole that had done what he had just done to me without any provocation. I'd done nothing to him. Didn't know who the guy was. Didn't know anything about him. And I had never done anything to him. And yet he chose to do that to me. And then I had to apologize to him for calling him an asshole, or I was going to take an even worse beating. And to this day, I wish I hadn't have done that. I wish now I had taken those side cutters out of my pocket and used them as a weapon. I might have had to go to jail for malicious wounding or something, but I might have been able to beat him if I'd just driven those into his eye or something like that, you know. And I wish to this day that I had have done that. But I didn't. So you can't go back and redo these things. It is what it is. I apologized. Shouldn't have had to do it, but I did. Really didn't have to do it. Should have fought him regardless of what the outcome would be. Whether it meant I was going to get my ass kicked or whether it meant I was going to go to jail for hurting him, I still should have apologized. I still shouldn't have apologized to him. Because the consequences of not apologizing to him would be all over with now. Had I not apologized, I wouldn't be in jail now, still. If I had maliciously wounded him, I might have had to do a couple of years or something. I might have spent the remainder of 86 and 1987 and part of 1988 in jail. But I wouldn't now be living with the shame of having apologized to that guy. But anyway, the bottom line is, that did something to me. That affected me. And funny, I was walking that day because my car needed a battery. That's what it was. The battery in my car was dead. And I had to go get a battery. And I didn't want to be driving the car because every time you went to start the car, you had to boost it. You know, you had to get somebody with a car that had a good battery to boost to get the car running again. And so I left the car at home that day and I walked. And here I ended up in that mess. But anyway, this is what happened. This sort of thing happened quite a bit when I'd be walking. You know, I'd have these kinds of run-ins. Anyway, that also, what happened too is though I drew negative police attention because I was getting into these scrapes with other guys and stuff, and so the police saw it as my fault. You know, I must be doing wrong. So there were times that things were reported to them, not by me, but by other people who witnessed things happen, and then the next thing you know, I'm the guy, and they're saying, well, why does everybody want to beat you up? What are you doing? You know, why do we keep hearing these stories about people attacking you on the street if you're not doing anything to bring it on? And so there was that. Anyway, and again, they already didn't like me. So, because I was refusing to play the role that was assigned to me. It ended up bringing things ahead now over the years because people see me in a certain way. And I know I'm not the only one who's seen this way. There's other people who are unjustly labeled this, that, or the other thing too. I should mention that I got to the point with the people attacking me that I decided that I was going to have to be even meaner and more violent and more unstable than they were in my dealings with them. And so I started arming myself. And now if you attack me, there was going to be a sharpened screwdriver involved, or there was going to be a fork that I had removed the two center tines from and sharpened the two outside tines like a razor involved, or whatever. That's what was going to happen. Anyway, and of course that drew a lot of negative police attention too, because now I was posing a real threat to others. Now, I mean, I couldn't keep taking beatings though. I had had enough of that. But it ended up moving ahead now to modern times. We're out of the old days now. We're out of the horse and buggy days, and we're into the modern times here, No more Pontiac Parisiennes to get thrown over the hood of. Those days are gone. But I actually miss the old cars. That's one of the things I do miss about the old days, is the old cars. But anyway, I take Rocky to the vet. He's had a snake bite. I know it's a snake bite. I was there when it happened. It actually happened right over there, just on the other side of where there was a wood pile there behind my work table where I cook, and it happened behind the wood pile. That summer we had a lot of snakes around here, and Rocky was in his glory hunting snakes. He was like #1 hunter. You're going to kill all the snakes, And he was pretty successful. He killed a lot of snakes. But, like anybody, at some point you meet your match. Well, he chased a snake around behind the wood pile, and the snake bit him. That's what happened to his leg. I take him to the vet. Now, I didn't have transportation at the time or anything. I had no vehicle. I was just back here. I was pushing a wheelbarrow in the town to get my groceries and my propane and stuff. And anyway, but I did manage to get Rocky to the vet at some point after that. And I asked the vet to look at it, and they didn't. Now, this was during the whole COVID fiasco, and I wasn't allowed into the veterinarian's office without a mask. I wouldn't wear a mask, so they wouldn't let me in. So I'd have to leave Rocky at the door, basically, and then pick him up at the door, wait outside while they tended to him. They wouldn't look at it, or they didn't look at it, or whatever. Then, when I was finally allowed back into the clinic, and I was in the examining room with him, I kind of cornered the vet, when he couldn't get away from me, and I said, look, I'd really like you to look at his leg. So the vet did look at it, and I told the vet what happened, and the vet said, we'll have to run $600 worth of tests to determine how this happened. We can't begin to treat it until we know what it is. And I said, it's a snake bite. Well, you can't say that because only $600 worth of tests would determine that. And I said, look, I was there when it happened. I know what it is. It's a snake bite. Nope, you can't say that. We need to do $600 worth of tests, and then we can treat him. Well, I refused to do it, and they said, well, no, we can't do anything. Now, what that was is they wanted a bribe. They wanted me to pay them a $600 bribe to treat Rocky. I refused to do it. See, they thought I was a simpleton. They thought I wouldn't see through their scam, but I did. And I said, no, I'm not paying $600 to be told what I already know. Well, then he's not going to be treated. So that's where, of course, then they have the right to refuse to treat an animal. I can't force them to treat him. I can't put a gun to their head and say, oh yeah, you will treat him. I can't do that. So I'm not allowed to do that. And I don't have a right to do that. I can't compel them to do anything. And I shouldn't be able to compel them to do anything. Now, they shouldn't be able to do what they were trying to do there. That was wrong. But what could I do about it? So anyway, he didn't get treated. And see, I look at it now and I say, you know, because of my pride and also my history wouldn't allow me to accept the role once again of village idiot and say, oh, okay, if you say so. You know, here's $600 for you. You know, the fact that I wouldn't do that, but that's what's expected of me, and the fact that I called him out for what was clearly a scam, that didn't cause them to respect me. It just caused them to say, well, then guess what? Your cat is shit out of luck. You know, you're not good. Rocky will not be receiving any treatment until you agree to do as we say. Well, I wasn't going to agree to do as they said. Rocky didn't receive treatment, and here we are. If I had swallowed my pride and agreed to take the role of village idiot and pay $600 that I didn't have, really, that I couldn't afford to pay, in order then so I could pay even more money to have him treated after that, which I also didn't have, really, which I also couldn't afford to pay, then maybe we wouldn't be in the mess we're in now. But what a situation to be in, you know. So there's a part of me feels guilty. I feel like I let Rocky down because I let my pride get in the way. Rather than just being an obedient little retard, doing what I was told to do, I called them out. And I've had this happen before where I've been punished for calling people out. What happened too in Perth was, though, I mentioned before how I got labeled a pedophile and a bunch of other things in Perth. Once I started bringing weapons into the situation, the physical attacks did stop. Because these guys, they were scared of me then. But they hated me. And so they wanted everybody to join in with them in their hatred of me. So they started spreading rumors. They started spreading rumors around that I was a pedophile, which isn't true. The last time I ever had a crush on a little girl or whatever was when I was a little boy. I remember when I was 7, 8, 9 years old or whatever, having crushes on little girls. But, you know, I don't think that's pedophilia any more than now at 56 years of age. If I had a crush on a 50-year-old woman or whatever, it wouldn't be anything weird about that. You know, it'd be perfectly normal. But like I say, in those days, though, I got labeled a pedophile by people who were mad at me because I wouldn't let them beat me up. Because I was prepared to do worse to them than they were prepared to do to me in order not to take a beating from them that I hadn't earned. Like, look, if I'm screwing around with somebody's wife or stealing from somebody or whatever, then I should expect to be attacked. Anybody who's doing that should. But when you're just going about your business, living your life, and trying not to bother other people, and you're being jumped just because other people think you're weak, you know, I mean, I don't know. What do you do? I mean, clearly, I didn't know what to do. But I knew I couldn't continue to do what I was doing. I couldn't continue to be a punching bag for other people. And so I armed myself. And I made it clear that I was prepared to do whatever, however drastic it was going to be, even something that would result in the other person dying and me going to prison for it. If that's what it was going to take not to get beat by them. And they knew I meant it, because you can't bluff. With a predator, you better mean what you're saying, because they will know. Predators aren't stupid. They're reprehensible, but they're not stupid. You know, you look at a serial killer. They IQ test serial killers. Worst predators on the planet, serial killers. Most of them are off the charts intelligence-wise. Ted Bundy, very intelligent man. Horrible, horrible person. Predator, piece of shit. You know, the electric chair was too good for him, really. Horrible person. but highly intelligent. He was tested, and he was highly intelligent. The judge who sentenced him to death actually shook his head when he sentenced him to death, and he said, "What a waste. You are brilliant. You have such a brilliant legal mind." He said, "I'd be honored to have you come and do cases in my courtroom as a lawyer because you have such a brilliant legal mind." He said, "What an awful waste." I seen the video of Ted Bundy being sentenced to death, and that's what the judge said to him. Very smart man. Predatory as hell, but extremely intelligent. So the thing is, you can't bluff with a predator. They will know. I had to get myself into a frame of mind where I would actually make good on whatever I said I'd do. Where I would not only show them the weapon, but I would use it. And so they knew, okay, this guy is not somebody to fool around with, so we're not going to tackle him on the street anymore. But what we're going to do is, when we're drinking beer down at the beer parlor, we're going to spread rumors. We're going to put bugs in people's ears. We're going to tell them that the guy's a pedophile. You know, everybody hates pedophiles. People will hate him. We can't get him one way, we'll get him another way. We'll go in the middle of the night when he's asleep and we'll vandalize his car. We'll kick the shit out of his car, we'll tear the mirrors off it, and we'll bend the radio antenna up, and we'll break the glass, and we'll carve profanities into the paintwork. We'll carve the word pedophile into his paint so that he can drive around with the word pedophile carved into his car. This is the stuff they would do. Anyway, getting back to the present time, I actually left Perth eventually because of all that. But getting back to the present time, that day in the veterinarian's office, a similar kind of a thing happened. I refused to accept the role that was assigned to me, and so I had to be punished. And unfortunately, Rocky got punished at the same time. And so I have to accept some responsibility for that, even though it was unfair and it was unjust and it should not have happened that way. I still have to accept some responsibility for it. I was too proud to just go along to get along. And because of that, now Rocky may lose his leg. Imagine that. Just imagine it. Imagine if any of you who have children, you know, one of your kids is in a situation like that, and a doctor tries to scam you, and you know he's trying to scam you, and so you refuse to get took, and then the doctor says, "Well, all right, then no treatment. No treatment." And then the kid ends up losing a leg. Even though you know that what happened there was unfair and unjust and just downright nasty on the part of the doctor, you got to still really seriously look at how you responded to that, you know, and how your response may have contributed to the situation as it is now. And see, that's what I'm doing with Rocky. And I know Rocky isn't my kid, you know. I didn't have sex with a woman and impregnate her, and then we had this kid named Rocky with all the fur and the tail and everything. You know, no, that's not what happened. But still, Rocky is my friend. You know, he's really my best friend. I spend more time with Rocky than I do with anybody. You know, since Rocky was a kitten, I've had him. When you see us together and you see how Rocky will put his paw on me, you know, and you'll see how he'll give me head boops and all that business. That's from 17 years of bonding. That's from 17 years of him trusting me to do my best for him. And it pains me to say it, but I let him down. I let my pride get in the way. Also, I couldn't really afford it. There is that too. I couldn't pay the money. I didn't. Yeah, I mean, I probably could have somehow. I could have went deeper into debt on my line of credit or whatever and paid it. But I didn't figure I should have to, and so I refused to. And it wasn't just me that was affected by that, though. Like I say now, who knows what's going to happen with Rocky. I'm hoping to get good news. Well, not good. There will be no good news. I know that. It's bad. But I'm hoping good news for me would be that it isn't as bad as I think it is. And that may be the case. At least now I have somebody who's speaking for me. I have to relinquish Rocky to her on paper, at least. Rocky will still be with me. But in order so that she can be, the treatment can be paid for the fund that she has for cats, for her cat rescue. It's all above board. I have to call the vet today, though, and I have to say those words. I have to open my mouth and say that that I relinquish Rocky. That's going to be hard. Trust me when I tell you that's going to be very hard. But I have to do it. Because the situation is such that something has to be done. And I'm not able to deal with these people on my own. If I was able to, it would have been solved a long time ago. It's not like I didn't try. But, yeah. Anyway, that's it. That's my story. There's a lot more to it than that, too. I could go on for hours, but it's kind of depressing, and I don't think we need to do that. But the bottom line is, right now I'm struggling. I'm struggling with a lot of feelings of just inadequacy, and like I failed, like I've let Rocky down, and like now Rocky's going to pay the price for my ineptitude. Anyway, that's it. I don't know what else to say. So I guess I had an hour long of a whine and rant. Now it's been an hour I've been on here. It's time to shut it down. And yeah. Anyway, thank you for listening, and I appreciate it. And we'll talk to you later.